and I want to call the brief council meeting to order. And before we begin, Mr. Town Manager, could you please read the disclaimer?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Just a reminder to all participants that this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded and available on the town website. For anybody that joins our meeting, I ask that you please use the raise hand function if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, and I will reach out to you directly if we do not have the correct name in place. Make sure that you do state your name and address before your comment for the public record. And with that, turn it back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. The first item is a public hearing motion to consider adoption of resolution 21201, a resolution appointing the town manager as the town's records officer. And as you know, we have a new employee, Donna Cawley, who is assessing the situation with our town records, and you will be getting a full report before the end of the month, which we will talk about during the work session. But in the meantime, it is required that we appoint, that the council confirms the appointment of Matt as the town's records officer. Council President Shaw, do you have any questions?
Questions?
Council Member Zoighauser.
No questions.
Councilmember Peel.
No questions.
Council Member Circo.
Good evening, no questions.
Councilmember Barr.
No questions.
Mr. Town Manager, has anyone?
No, not at this time.
Thank you. Are you prepared, Council, are you prepared to make a motion?
I move that we approve resolution 2-21-1, appointing the town manager as the town's official records officer.
Thank you. Is there a second? I see Zoighauser. Is there discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? All those opposed? Thank you very much. Next item is to consider, this is a motion to consider approval of the Stormwater Study Committee. I think it's called the Stormwater Study Committee Survey. Council Member Circo, as liaison, could you present this briefly, please?
So I believe we now have the latest version of the survey. There was a little disconnect at the meeting last week. So it's just to collect information, and the residents will be in folks, and it is a publicly accessible document, but we're just collecting addresses, not names. And I think it should really help the Stormwater Study Committee. So I hope folks will approve it.
Thank you. Council President Shaw, do you have any questions?
No, but I want to thank the council members who filled out the survey ahead of time to make sure everybody thought the survey worked.
Thank you, Council Member Zoighauser. Do you have any questions? You're muted.
Steve, just a quick question. I did fill it out. I thought it was really easy to fill out and well done. Do you know if the recipients, I don't know who's getting the information, if they were happy with how it was received? Was it as easy as their end as it was at ours?
I haven't gotten any further feedback, but I assume it went smoothly.
I hope so, because from my end, it seemed really simple and easy to do. So I just hope that it's as easy for them in gathering the information. But maybe you can let us know, because we were, I guess, the guinea pigs.
Will do.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Councilmember Peel, do you have any questions?
My only question is just that, assuming that we approve this, does it make sense for Steve to shoot off a message to Ellen just so that they can work on getting it out? Because I know that they said they wanted to get it out as soon as possible.
I'll let Steve answer that.
But I think it'll actually be, won't it actually be released by Matt?
I don't know. I guess that's a logistical question.
Mr. Town Manager, do you want to answer that?
If you'd like, I can email Ellen and I can CC you, Steve. I think they had asked me to send out the the link
Yeah.
in an announcement
okay.
from the
Yeah.
town.
Okay.
That'd been my recommendation. Just keep
Matt
it nice
can
and
take care of
official.
it after the meeting. All right, that's my only
Thank you,
point that you
Council
got this to reference.
Member. Thank you. Councilor Barr, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Okay, thank you, Council. Madam President, your motion.
If I might ask, I know that the subcommittee members on the survey had a continuing interest, at least my next door neighbor, Brian. Would it be possible to let him know? Because he's the one I was working with on getting the survey out to people.
I'll CC Brian and Courtney, who I know kind of spearheaded the survey from the committee.
Madam President, are you prepared to make a motion?
Maybe Steve would like to make it.
So I move that the council approve the Stormwater Study Committee survey for immediate release.
Thank you, and I see the president seconded. Is there discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, all those opposed? Thank you, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn the council meeting.
Moved.
Second voted. Thank you. That concludes the council meeting.
That's great. The council meeting ended a little bit early, but so we can start our work session a little bit earlier, if that's okay with everybody. The first item on our list is the discussion of the town committees and council liaison assignments. There are several different documents. Matt prepared a list, a spreadsheet of all the committees and the liaisons to the extent we had them, as well as the chairs, which ones had charters and which ones did not, which committees still have vacancies. Do people have any questions or concerns about that list? Or Matt, do you want to say anything about it?
I don't have really anything to say unless the only thing I don't have on here, and I don't know if it's useful to you as I continue to update this, is if you'd like me to indicate the street of the committee members, which is usually included on council, the list that goes before the council when the committees are approved.
Madam President, may I add one thing? We are planning to put everyone in a term, as I think we had discussed, and we won't do that until, remember, this month the council had a request about the traffic committee. So next month we will present the terms, because remember, the goal is that each year a third of the members will come up. It'll make it a nice way to transition committees.
Excellent. What about the vacancies? I know you've worked hard to recruit members. Do you have anything you'd like to say about the Board of Elections or?
Well, the Board of Elections is not, the Board of Elections and the Audit Committee are not, they're in the charter, so those are different.
Right. But
But
we
in
still.
terms of, so what's your,
we have
well, the only thing I can add is that, of course, the Traffic Committee, the council has made a request, and what other committee vacancy do you want to address?
It just seemed like with the election coming up, that would be an important one.
Well, right, but that's separate.
And the welcoming committee has no members, but.
Well, I think I explained about that we're having the event soon, and then that I wanted to use that event to recruit as a means of recruiting members for the committee. So, but I mean, I'm working on recruiting for that committee now.
Do you have
So I guess your question is related to how, so it would be my goal that that be a fully functioning committee. So I think it would be good if that committee had a liaison.
Well, yes, that's one of the issues for us tonight.
I can't hear you now.
Do you have, do you and Phyllis have an idea of when you might be holding this event, since you said it might be soon?
Well, it's going to be virtual and it's going to be produced by MMC. And I think we have Matt, what is our target date?
Let's
It's March.
see.
March.
I have it written down.
It's in March.
I think we had,
Once you all settle
think
on a date, you
we
might
had
want
said
to.
March 21st is what we had penciled in.
Yeah.
I just thought maybe council members would want to pencil it on their
Well,
calendar.
we will get back to you on that.
Okay, very good. All right, does anybody have any questions at all for Matt or Jeffrey about the first document?
I just have a comment, if I could please, and Matt, just to make sure you got my email about the communications committee. Did you get it? And
No,
then-
I might have missed, I think I missed that, so I apologize.
Kathleen Kenyon is not on the committee and Sloan Hurst is on the committee.
Okay.
And then I have one other comment following up with what Marnie was speaking about for the election committee. It is in the charter that there should be 5 members. So again, with the election right around the corner, it seems like that's something because last year, I think Robin Orsak was on it last year. We weren't.
Robin Orsak is a member of that. I didn't realize that is not a committee. That is a board of supervisors of election, and it doesn't require a liaison. And so
Yes, but
Robin Orsak is a member of the board.
so Robin should be, then that's another correction
Yeah.
that needs to be made. She should be added. But unless that's only 4 and it's not in compliance with.
Phyllis is still a member of that. So Phyllis is a member of the Board of Supervisors of Elections.
So it's Phyllis, Robin, Lucy, Jim, and Sherry Bindeman?
Correct.
Great, that's perfect. Thank you.
This was very useful to kind of get our final names and so on. Any
Yeah,
other changes?
I think on the PNRC, I think those are old names because I'm pretty sure the most recent time that we ran those names through that we replaced Jennifer Marin with somebody else and that, or maybe that was the environmental committee, but in any event, she has moved. So
Well,
I
but
don't know if you
well,
have replaced her or not.
I don't know that she has resigned from the committee though, Franny.
I
Okay,
thought
so,
that you had replaced her on both of the committees last time around.
okay.
If she
So-
hasn't, then it's fine. We can wait
So,
until you do that.
I didn't realize that you were going to be discussing these kind of. I thought the discussion was about the liaisons. Now, the PNRC committee, those are the people on the committee.
Oh, okay.
Once we establish terms, then we will be communicating with everyone
Mhm.
to let them know what their term is. And so
Okay.
so if somebody resigns from a committee, there needs to be a process if somebody's going to resign. We can't just assume anything.
No,
Yes.
that's my mistake. I thought that, I know
Okay.
that at some point, the environmental committee, that she had dropped off of that one, and I had assumed that she had dropped off of both
okay,
of them, but if
well-
that's not the case, then that's fine.
I understand, but that raises a very good point that there needs to be so if someone is going, we need to communicate to members that they're in a term, that when their term is up, they will be asked whether they want to be reappointed. And then if at any time they resign, they need to send an email to the town manager. So that's something I'm glad you brought this up because those are things that we can we can add to the protocols
Yeah,
to clarify everything. Because we don't need to be wasting time ever in the future wondering if
Okay.
somebody is on a committee or not.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to prolong this too long, but the reason why Jennifer dropped off the Environment Committee is because we determined she was no longer eligible because they're no longer resident in the town. They have a residence in the town, but they don't live in it.
But
So,
we don't, there's no requirement, and the town manager can verify, I mean, the town attorney.
I know,
I
but
don't
that-
think a committee
law doesn't
member,
apply
I
to
don't think
the
a committee member needs to be a town resident.
we should determine that, don't you think?
Let me ask the town attorney.
I'm looking right now, Mr. Mayor. I'll let you know when I find that provision. Looks like it's 13.3. Let's see.
I don't think it's a requirement that a committee member be a resident.
I don't think so either. I will verify and let you know if you want to continue the discussion. I can chime in once I find it.
These are good points. I know my guess is the operations manual will be a living document as we learn more about how we want to proceed and
Yes, that is the goal.
what questions come up, so.
And for example, that's a very good point. The council could decide whether or not
Mhm.
it needs to be a resident or not.
Yeah, so that it's not in the code. Section 13.2 says each committee shall consist of a minimum of 3 volunteer members. Doesn't say they have to be
I
residents.
believe we had this discussion years ago when we were writing that, when the council was writing that, because I think someone brought up the possibility that a committee the council might want someone who has expertise on a certain topic to be on a committee. And that it wasn't necessarily a town resident. So that's open for a possible change in the future.
I would be in favor of it being residents. I think we're making important decisions at the committee level these days, and I think if that's the way things are going to go, then it's important to have those committee members be residents of the town. I can understand why you would want to maybe engage a consultant, but if you have the money in the budget, but otherwise, I think we're talking about issues that are important to people who live here. And listen, Jennifer's one of my closest friends, so I don't think I'm selling her out here. But she does live over in Kenwood now.
Well, again, that, if you want to change that, remember that would require a code amendment.
Revision.
The last time we had nominated and approved anybody on the Parks and Natural Resources Committee was May of last year. And at that time, Jennifer was still on the proposed slate.
So she's still on the committee by law, because even if no matter where she's a resident of, she was approved by the council last May.
Okay, the only reason I flagged it is because I know that she was taken off the environmental committee, and I thought I was just pointing out an oversight here and thought maybe the names were not up to date.
Well,
I
I'm
need to
glad
bring a policy
you brought it.
conversation.
I'm glad you brought it up because it led to an important discussion.
Okay, sounds like we have some work to do on it.
Brandy, can I ask you if you'll be kind of our remembering person on this, since you've done a lot with the code?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I can also ask Jennifer if she still wants to be on it, and then
No, she does. You don't need to ask her that. We can find out, but
okay. Sure.
Any other comments on the document that Matt has posted? If not, could we turn then to the liaison issue? I included 2 documents in the package. The one that we published at the beginning of last summer, and then one where we had already made some changes. People had volunteered, we added committees and so on. So there were, as I understood it, there were only a couple of liaison and alternate positions still open. The welcoming committee doesn't have either a liaison or an alternate. And I don't think the Stormwater Committee had an alternate. At the time, I think we all said, oh, everybody's going to want to come to the meetings. And so we didn't, I think, go ahead and actually appoint an alternate, but we probably should have one person who's an alternate.
Yeah, actually on the spreadsheet, I'm listed as the alternate on it. And that's fine by me if others are okay with that.
I don't know where Matt got that because that was not kind of what.
Yeah, I apologize if I put that in incorrectly.
Okay, well, it's fine. So Robin, you'll be the alternate.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Yep, thank you.
So, sorry, I didn't mean to volunteer you, Robin.
Well, it's an issue I've been around, so it's fair to say that I be the alternate.
And the welcoming committee. I guess I could volunteer for either the liaison or the alternate. Anybody else?
Sure, I'd be happy to. But it will depend. I don't know how much help I'll be because it'll depend on the date because you know, we're expecting a grandchild. So I'm not sure I'm the best one for that.
You've got your own welcoming to do.
Yes, thank you, Robin. Yes.
Well, Barbara, could I tentatively put you down as the alternate and I'll be the liaison for the time being?
Sure. Sounds good, Marnie.
Okay, so I think that completes the list. What I would, and if you think it's useful, well, first of all, Barbara Moranis and I exchanged a few emails about the next journal. And one of the things I mentioned to her is the committees, and she had wondered whether maybe Matt could put together an article that about the committees, maybe the table with the liaisons and so on. What do you think, Matt or Jeffrey?
Yeah, she asked me. Yes, I think that's a great idea.
Sure, yeah, would be happy to do that.
Okay, I actually think the spreadsheet, I don't know if it'll work in the journal, is kind of useful. You know, it's a quick way to get a picture of what's going on. So,
Can I
And
ask
you
a
know-
quick question? I just wanted to follow up on something. I didn't get a chance to look back this weekend at the committee rules, but do the committees in fact have to have a liaison at the meetings in order for them to go forward or not? Okay, thank you.
Madam President, in terms of the article for the journal, what might be a nice angle if someone wrote about what does a liaison to a committee do? Because I don't think that's really been ever explained in an article. That might be a nice angle to it.
I could do that if Matt doesn't want to. Maybe I should, since it's a council role.
Well, you know, Matt could draft something that you could just edit. He's so good.
Matt
writing
doesn't play
articles.
the liaison role, so,
He could interview you.
okay.
He
All
could
right, that
interview
sounds-
you. That might be nice, the way Eileen Heller does.
I might add, I just second Marnie's thought. I like the idea of description of the liaison, but I really like the idea of putting the chart in the journal. I think people will find that incredibly helpful to know who's on what committee and just be able to pull it out and they can put it in their town directory, which should be arriving right anytime now.
Yes, it's gone to the printers.
Yeah, so I actually think the chart would be super handy for a lot of people.
Actually, I wonder if it could be a pullout page.
Well, I think it would be better to wait until after the traffic committee is appointed.
And as well as the election board and that need, you know, again, do we have, if we're not in compliance with the charter, is that a problem? Because it says that we have
We're
to.
in compliance with the charter. We
Right,
have
so
5 members.
Okay. I thought Phyllis had stepped down because that's how she decided to join the welcoming committee.
she had stepped down. She will be stepping down as chair.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I kind of hate to hold everything up till we get the vacancies on the traffic committee.
And in fact, what we could do is maybe announce it and say, you know, there are still a few vacancies left. If you're interested in serving on these committees, you know, reach out to the town hall.
I think that's a great idea. Then they'll see how many, I mean, it's a lot of people in town that have signed up for committees. Maybe we can guilt some other folks into joining in on the fun.
Okay, moving on, the third item, which didn't get on your printed agenda, but I did send it out to people, was that we had agreed we were going to talk about the options for rolling out the operations manual for committees, because a lot of committees still don't know how they should be proceeding. They don't understand the communications on the in emails, the importance of the Open Meetings Act, how they make recommendations to the town. So it seems like getting something out to them sooner rather than later would be helpful. Anybody? I mean, there were some suggestions at the council meeting. One of them was to hold like a Zoom meeting, and as many chairs as could come. Another suggestion had been to have the liaisons individually contact committee members. Personally, it seems like
I thought that you decided that there would be a meeting, it would be recorded, as many people as possible would attend, and then it would be available in a lot of different, because you're never going to get them all to come at one time. But the main thing is to get a recording that Matt could do very easily, that sort of spoon feeds the highlights of the protocols. And then that will be a tool that we will have, and we won't have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah, I think we should do this once, not one time for every committee.
And I love that idea. And having watched some of the recorded committee meetings, it
Yeah.
works really, really well. It's great.
Yeah.
I'll work over the next week or two. I'll put together something to do sort of orientation and
then I think also it would be good to have Ron participate to
Agree.
clarify in case somebody has a question, or it could also be Matt and Ron team webinaring. And it could be along the lines of what the chair of the Public Safety Committee did recently, that kind of presentation. Because it's not a discussion about, it's presenting the protocols. It's not saying how should a new law be or a new policy be. It's presenting what has gone through quite a lengthy process that has lots of good input, and everything was written with a lot of thought in mind over many years.
So could we then assume that Matt will work with Ron to set up a presentation and a date and invite all the chairs and then record it? I'm not trying to.
As long as Matt, yeah.
that's fine.
If
Yep.
you wanted to roll too, Jeffrey, I could, that I'm not
Well,
trying to.
I was just going, my plan was just to sort of come on in the beginning and explain how important this is and how much we rely on committees and how they need to be fully functioning. And then that's it.
Yeah. Good.
That sounds good. So we will just leave it up to you all to set a date, but I think, at least from my perspective, the sooner you can do it, the better, because otherwise the committees are they won't meet the expectations we have for how committees operate because they won't know what our expectations are.
Right.
So,
Okay.
yeah,
Agreed.
good. Okay. So anything else on our committees? Sounds good. Okay. The next item we talked about a little bit before is the town right-of-way agreements. And I am definitely not an expert on code issues, but as I understood this, I think the question was, should the town have some kind of licensing agreement so that there's some kind of paper trail so that 10 years later, if there's something in the right-of-way, we have some sense of how the agreement occurred. So in your package is what our current right-of-way agreement is, and then also how it differs from Martin's Edition, which does require a license. With that, I'm happy to turn it over to somebody who knows more about right-of-way agreements and the code.
Sure, I'm happy to do so, or unless you wanted to, Matt.
Take it away, Ron.
Okay. So, yeah, right now, the code provides that owners who abut the right of way aren't supposed to put a structure, wall, fence, tree, hedge, shrubbery, or other plant growth, except for low-growing plantings, things under 12 inches, in the right of way unless they have the town's approval. And the code requires a written license to use the right of way that would then be recorded in land records. And why that's a good idea, as the president noted, and I'll give you a real life example. In a neighboring town, there was a retaining wall that started to crumble, and it was put in maybe 50 years ago. And so it wasn't clear who put it in and who should be responsible to rebuild it. So that's one reason why you might want to document who actually built a structure in the right of way, to definitively document who's responsible for repairing it, and also who might be liable for injuries that result as a result of something in the right of way. And furthermore, right now the streets are a certain width and sidewalks are where they are, but in the future we don't know what use of the right of way may entail. Right now, the unimproved portions, the grass strips, may be needed in the future. So if someone has put in a fence or something else, we may need to ask that it be removed. And so, the license would also state that the owner has to remove whatever's put there with permission upon revocation by the town at their cost. But this is a provision that requires some policy consideration, because there may be instances where you don't want to require a detailed agreement for something minor, and then to pay me to draft it and record it. So by example, Matt shared the Martin's Editions code, and that gives the manager some leeway with respect to things that are minor, like guardrails along steps and the like. So the council could reassess this provision and say, maybe we don't need a license agreement for a plant that's 13 inches because it's not worth the expense. So yeah, that's the background.
One other thing, one reason I had flagged it as well is to think about the role of the mayor, and by extension the administrative staff, myself included, versus the council in issuing the right-of-way agreements for something like a fence that normally we might issue a permit administratively. If somebody wanted to build that in the right of way, maybe a fence isn't a great example because there are other limitations to within the code that might not allow it, but
A
just as
13-inch plant would
but
be a
just
good
as an
example.
example, yeah, right, a plant, should that go before the council?
Mhm.
Ron, can I ask you a question about how the village handles a definition of the right of way? Because my understanding from talking to you in the past that it is difficult to measure, and it's not something that people necessarily have recorded on their surveys. And so I wonder, does the village use a defined term that sort of gets most of the rights of way correctly measured, or what? Because it seems to me that it would be easy for us to put on our permit application that we require people who are getting a building permit or a fence permit or a wall permit, we could require people to indicate whether or not their plans include putting something into the public right of way, which could then trigger a discussion at a building permit review, or could trigger an evaluation by by Doug if it were for something that was just going to the mayor. But what I'm curious about is whether there's sort of an understanding that's set out in their code for the village about how to define the public right of way. Because I think we would have a hard time, getting it right every time if we put it only on the residents. So that's my question.
Yeah,
I even have,
Great.
if I could just before you ask, just an even simpler question for either Franny or Ron. What is in our code, how is the right of way defined?
I don't.
so, yeah, Franny's shaking her head.
Yeah.
The right of way is not defined, but it's basically defined by the developer's plat that is recorded that creates the right of way. So in Martin's Additions, for example, they dealt for many years with right of way issues because vegetation had grown up over decades and started to obstruct motorist sightlines at intersections particularly. And the village was trying to get folks to trim back their vegetation to address these motorist sightline issues. And as Franny noted, it's hard to determine where exactly the front lot line is located. I mean, you can send Doug out there with a metal detector and he might get lucky and find the pipes that the surveyor put in, the iron rods or pins, but they were put in decades ago and might not be able to locate them all, and there may not be one at every corner. So Martin's Additions paid a surveyor to survey all the streets in town, and they have that information on a laptop. So if someone wants to know exactly where the right of way line is, it can be located with that information, because when that work was done, the surveyor did put survey markers, maybe one on every street, right? I don't know exactly how many were put in. So the right of way is the area of the street as drawn by the developer on the subdivision plat. It might be 50 feet in width, and the actual paved road surface, may only be 30 feet in width. So then there's, 10 feet of right of way on each side. However, the paved surface might not be right in the center of the right of way. It might be offset to one side. And so you can't be sure unless you locate those boundary survey markers. The town code, Somerset, does require, with a building permit application, a building survey with a margin of error when there are structures going in that can impact setbacks. But a boundary survey is not required if someone just wants to plant something in the right of way.
Right. Also, I know we would also need to sort of grandfather existing structures, at least using the language that I'm looking at here, as long as existing trees or fences or walls are not obstructing obstructing pedestrian or vehicular traffic. I know that we started to talk about this the other night when we were talking about the rock formation landscaping that was done over on Deal Place. And the question was whether or not those rocks will be in the right of way, and if so, should we have an agreement, or should we have some control over whether or not they're put in? I mean, I think just from looking at them, we can see that they are not going to interfere with the pedestrian or vehicular traffic. And at this point, they're put in, and any change that we made going forward to that, I think it would be hard to throw it backward, and to require a right-of-way agreement for that. Those are just my thoughts on that. But I think that the tricky thing about something like this is that most people sort of have a general understanding of a right-of-way, and they might say, okay, maybe my hydrangeas are going to have to be torn up someday. I'll take that risk. And but that it might not rise to the level where they would say, I want a license to put some plants out here. And the other thing that I would be curious about is, if you're talking about a license agreement that gets recorded with, with the deeds, then, when we have a house that's sold in town, then we now have houses that are sold with a license to use the right of way. And then we have houses that are sold without a license to use the right of way. And I think that becomes a little complicated for the town management when you have, people come in as new owners, and they sort of say, look, we've got this conveyed license, and it's not something anyway, I think it could be figured out, obviously, but I would be in favor of saying that we have sort of a generalized defined term that triggers a review, and then that brings it into the town office. And then, if it looks murky, you could then say, listen, we can't tell if this is the right of way or not. Let's go back to the plat, or let's get a survey or something. But at least you would be able to bring it in for review.
Franny, so are you saying it would only come up for people that were required to provide a developer's plan? Is that what you're thinking?
No, well, first of all, I'm thinking that this would be a completely new concept for most people. That most people, like I said, would have sort of a generalized understanding that plants that they put toward the front edge of their property might need to be torn up someday. But beyond that, they probably don't have any kind of very good sense about where the right of way begins and ends.
And we don't,
especially if you don't have a town tree, it's hard to sort of eyeball it.
Right.
And the question I guess I would ask before we went too far with this is whether we would want to sort of create an administrative hurdle for people where we would say, we would have to go into the code essentially saying, nobody can place any structure, wall, fence, tree, hedge, shrubbery, or any other plant unless you've confirmed that it's not in the public right of way. And, that to me seems a little crazy in terms of the size of our town government. We just don't have, I'm not sure if we have the resources to go at it that way.
Matt, do you know how much Martin's Additions paid to have the surveyor come in and do a full village survey? Was that while you were there?
No,
Oh.
it existed when I was starting there, but I think it was a tens of thousands of dollar project to survey it, and it was coupled with a computer program that down the road may be something that's useful for Somerset, because it also had the listing of all the trees in town, for example, things like that. Fire hydrants, any of those public infrastructure things as well. But in any case, it was a tens of thousands of dollar project to get the town surveyed and to create the programming.
And refresh my memory, how many homes are in Martin's Additions about? Is it
315 maybe?
So it's a little smaller than us, and it was still tens of thousands of dollars.
The other thing is that we do have a tool under our code where we can regulate problematic, trees and hedges and shrubbery and other things that are interfering with pedestrian or vehicular traffic. I mean, it does take some work, as Matt knows and Jeffrey knows, but I mean, we have a tool in the code so that if there is an obstruction for pedestrians and traffic, we can go to a property owner and say, you know, here's evidence that something you have growing on your property is getting in the way of this view. And I'm not sure that we even have to get into whether or not something is in the public right of way. If it's growing over like, let's say you have a huge tree that's on somebody's front yard, but it's growing out over the sidewalk, right? So that it's obstructing the sidewalk, the town could still go into that person and say, look, the tree that is clearly on your yard has grown so much that it's now over the sidewalk. So even though the tree is in a proper place, it's, we have a town interest in making sure the sidewalks are clear. And, this is really only just focused on limiting things that can be done in the right of way. And I think our tool is actually more useful in terms of meeting our interests.
Though the flip side of that, Franny, is that being on the PNRC, and I know that you've likely talked to Kristen about this too, there are homeowners, or we've approached homeowners several times since I've been on the PNRC, and we've wanted to put trees in the right of way, and the homeowners have turned us down for one reason or another.
I know that has happened.
Yes, so that's something that we might want to keep in mind as well. And most of those battles we have lost. So
Right.
if the council is concerned about trees and just wanting to plant them on town property, we might want to take a firmer stand. I don't know. I'm just throwing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think defining what the public right of way is, if we had the money someday, it would be an interesting thing to know about, and an interesting tool for Tolbert to be able to go to a homeowner and say, on this property, the right of way goes out to this spot, and I'm putting a tree here. I do think that would be useful, but I'm not sure if you want to create a licensing obligation for people who are putting things into the public right of way that we mostly don't care about until they get to the point where they obstruct the view, in which point I would say that we would have a tool to go after people and say, you can't see, or you can't get on the sidewalk or whatever, and we're going to issue a citation.
I hope we can bring this discussion to an end soon, but my reaction to everything you said, Franny, is that we don't want to do this. It's basically what it boils down to. Now, at the moment, we can't even define our own right of way.
Right.
And so we can't really have a license system because we don't know what we're licensing.
Exactly. I agree with you, Robin.
And I do
So,
too.
under those circumstances, we've got to rely on other features in the code, which is what you're telling us. And we'll come back to this if the problem arises, is what it boils down to.
Although I agree wholeheartedly with you, Robin. I'm a little confused about how this ended up on our work session agenda.
Well, somebody had brought up Deal Place. They have a structure that
Got it. Okay.
is not, otherwise doesn't really require a building permit,
Right.
but is clearly extending beyond where their property line is, and may not be an issue, but somebody could also trip on it, for
Yeah.
example.
But in fact, Matt, it's not extending past their property line. It's extending into the public right of way on their property. So I just think it's important to use that properly, because their property includes the public right of way in the sense that they own that land. It's just that the town has the ability to step onto it to do things, right? So
I don't think, wait, I'm sorry.
Their property line goes all the way to their property line. The public right of way means that the town, maybe I'm remembering this wrong, but I thought that the property line was the included part of the public right of way.
Yeah.
The reason why it's on here to discuss is because when these kind of situations occur, do we want to spend money on the town attorney to write this up? Or do we want to require that they obtain a permit and ask the council for a waiver?
I think those are the only two choices.
Well, I have a question getting back to Deal. The first conversation that I happened to run into Wayne one day when I was walking by there and I pointed it out to him. And he mentioned that he wondered if it was connected to a sump pump and if the water would be trickling down. Did anyone ever check on that?
When I talked to him, to the homeowner, he said that it was just an aesthetic
Got it.
structure,
Right.
that it wasn't serving any practical use other than just looking pretty.
Perfect. Thank you.
In the eye of the beholder. Yep. Okay.
If I might just say, maybe we don't need to talk about this anymore tonight. I mean, it was brought up. It sounds like we are not ready to talk about right-of-way agreements and licenses, and that this issue could come up again, but it might be years from now before it does. Is that correct?
But can I just make one comment? If we're putting together a 5 or a 10-year budget plan, I think that is something what Martin's Edition has done. I think that's incredibly useful for the right of way. And you said for trees and the like. So if someone could put a pin in that for maybe down the road, I think that would be great.
I think Jeffrey actually proposed that years ago, but we didn't have the money.
Also, I want to say that if my definition is wrong, I'm not going to be upset if I'm wrong. I can't remember.
Oh, yeah, that's mostly correct, Franny. So Maryland law provides that when a developer subdivides land, title is deemed to convey to the center of the street if the street is abandoned. And then in the interim, the town holds an easement right for the benefit of the public. So there's like a, like a reversionary interest in the land to the center of the street. And so state law provides, for example, that the abutting property owner has a property interest in that land. You can't increase the burden on that easement to the abutting owner's detriment, like converting a street into a playground.
Right.
Right.
Are there any other comments people want to make? Are we ready to wrap up this discussion?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well then then the next item on our agenda is just a very brief discussion of moving to set some dates for the council's work session on the budget. So Matt, do you want to say a few words about that?
Sure. So I think we've discussed this a few times. The budget committee had initially sought to do quarterly presentations to the council. And what ended up happening is our income revenues were impacted indirectly by COVID, but directly because of the extension of the tax filing deadline. And so one of our large tranches of income revenue was significantly lower than what we anticipated. And so we don't have as good a handle on our revenue as we might otherwise in a given year. And so we've scheduled a meeting with the budget committee for February 17th with the comptroller's office, similar to the one that preceded the first presentation from the budget committee to the council, to get a handle on revenues in town, the way COVID, the way that COVID has impacted fiscal issues within the state and how that might pertain to Somerset. And by late February, we should get a better handle on what our income revenues will look like. But that doesn't really give a lot of time for the budget committee to digest those numbers and prepare a report for the council, and then to have you all have time to digest that as well. And so I think the plan is for the budget committee to do a presentation for the council at the first of, in the past, we've done 2 work sessions where we've gone through the budget line by line. And because there's the 5 council members, the mayor, the budget committee, I think what we've done for similar things in the past is to just set up an online poll for people to check their availability. But I think we're sort of looking at maybe, that maybe 1 meeting in the second week of March and 1 in the 3rd week of March, or 1 in the 4th, in those 2nd, 3rd, 4th weeks, to have 2 work sessions to work through the entire budget so that it's ready for introduction in April and adoption in May. So I guess the one question I had was, I think last year we had set it up to do 1 during the daytime and then 1 1 evening session. Should I just go ahead and pick days throughout that week and give evening times and daytimes and give you a bunch of different options, or are there certain days that I should steer away from? Certain days that you would prefer that I try to schedule them for?
Well, Steve has a real job. He can't participate during the day. Can you, Steve?
In COVID, I might have a little bit of flexibility, but in general, you're right. It's tough for me to do an extended meeting earlier than 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't do day meetings then, because it's too hard for him.
Okay.
You don't have to get sandwiches. So that's good. Saving money on sandwiches.
Darn.
Okay, so I will, then what I'll do is in the tomorrow, I'll start working on that and send around invitations to everybody, and we'll get some dates set.
Great.
Our next agenda item is to talk about whether or not the town wants to file comments on the PEPCO case in front of the Public Service Commission. The group that the state hired, the MEA hired, sent us a memo which included the comments from the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, which summarized their comments on the tariff. And they've encouraged other jurisdictions to send in comments. You don't have to, but if we're going to do it, we need to send in comments by, I believe it's the 29th of March. So Robin put together a few thoughts of areas that we might want to comment on. So I think the question in front of us is, do we want to file comments on the tariff? And if we did, we would come up with some ideas at our work session, and we would actually approve those at the March council meeting and then submit them to the Public Service Commission, or we don't have to do any comments. So Robin, I don't know if you wanted to start off the discussion with some things that you noticed that you thought might be worth commenting on.
Sure. I mean, I'll just give a little bit of background first, which is that we had this prior presentation from PEPCO and about the LED streetlight initiative. And when they explained that there was no charge to us upfront for them, they said that instead they would keep the current schedule, which would allow PEPCO to recover the costs of the work over time, because the LED streetlights will be lower cost to them than the current lights. And so that sounded fine and reasonable, and that is reflected in this document. But if you look closely at the document, their costs are estimated. They're building in a cost for equipment failure, the arms off the lights, in a certain percentage off the lights. And that's an estimate. We don't know what it is. With the result that you really can't predict when they would have recovered all their costs and their charges, because we don't know what their costs are. So that's why I said we should have an independent auditor that reviews their costs and allow the independent auditor to determine the date when costs are reimbursed. And that's the biggest point in all of that. There are some other smaller technical points. In one filing, their costs, in one piece of it, their costs seem very high, and that seems based upon an assumption of replacing equipment that is beyond a realistic prospect. But that's not the estimate they use to come up with our actual costs, which are about $591 per light, which are a lot lower, as you remember, than the $2,500 they were trying to charge us. The small technical point is to do with the smart nodes. And I think this document misunderstands smart nodes a little bit. They themselves are not threatening at all. What becomes threatening is once you put options into the smart nodes, like cameras, for example, which are threatening to some people. And so the smart nodes are a real advantage to Pepco because they allow them to identify lights that are failing without having a call in. They really are useful to them. So we should certainly encourage them to put them in. And I said that part of it needs to be emphasized. And if there's any question over privacy, which is where the options come in, then that comes separately. And it is reasonably stated, I believe, in the Pepco view that these will be options and municipalities will have choice whether to put cameras in, which means they have a choice themselves to decide on how much privacy matters to them. So that's, as I said, getting into the nuts and bolts of it. The big one is we should have an independent auditor who can review their actual costs, and the independent auditor should decide when they are repaid under those circumstances.
Robin, can I ask you?
Madam President, can I say something?
Go ahead.
So before you say something, Councilor Peel. So Councilor Barr, I think I'm so glad that you analyzed this, and I think your questions are excellent. I think that in terms of a strategy, that it would be better if we met with Pepco now to raise our concerns. I think it would not be in our best interest, given that we're trying to lobby Pepco for to have a priority, to maybe be in a special program. I don't think it would be politically expedient for us to testify at a public service commission hearing with this. I think that we can raise our concerns, our legitimate concerns and questions, but I don't think we should be public in any way. We are taking the same status in the General Assembly. There are a lot of bills that have been introduced by council member by Delegate Carr that we would be in favor of, but there's no reason for us to embarrass Pepco.
No, I agree with you, and I'm not recommending that we do an independent filing and that meeting directly with Pepco is right.
Yeah, I think
if you look at the comments, independent auditor, it could help them or it could help us. It just depends upon when what the auditor says. And the other point is the smart nodes. This actually helps Pepco. I mean, in other words,
I think all the things you're saying are going to help Pepco. If they clarify those things, it'll help Pepco get this approved.
Yeah, right.
So that's the role that I suggest we play, not publicly embarrassing Pepco in any way.
I agree.
I don't disagree with that. I wanted to ask Robin a question about the lights because it sounds like he might understand how much. I think this is good that Petco wants to do this so that we don't have to pay for it. But I'm just wondering, do you think that there are going to be any opportunities for Somerset to either control the lights themselves? I mean, it says that they can be dimmed, for instance, or that we would have any choice about which actual lights are put in. Remember, I mean, I know that we went through that pilot program and people had opinions about which light was the nicest and which one we would prefer if we had all the money in the world and so on. Do you think that this means that those questions of choice are sort of moot at this point, Robin?
In the presentation, they showed the different bulbs they were offering, and there was a limited choice for us. So there remains some choice, but it isn't perfect.
Okay.
So that
they list in the tariff, depending on which kind of light fixture you have, about 30 different kinds of bulbs. But for our Cobra heads, what's in the table on page 4 of the COG presentation lists pretty much the options for us, the Cobra headlights. I mean, we're probably down in the pretty low. We're not going to want 400 watt bulbs, but it's a pretty limited set of choices.
Yeah.
But they're all going to be somewhere in the 2,700 to 3,000 light range. So they're in the range of lighting that we like. The bulbs may not be as attractive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, your other point was about dimming the lights.
Yeah.
That comes under options, and so they'll be trying to sell them to the municipalities. And light dimming is one we might want. Cameras might be one we don't want. I don't know. We've got to decide those things ourselves. But we will have the option of choosing that. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
I think that another point here is their monthly O&M charge is so high. If you look at our experience with the LED bulbs on Dorset, they haven't had to do anything to those bulbs in 10 years.
Yeah. I'm hoping they can never get that passed because the current tariff for LED lights, the monthly OM charge is a fraction of that. So I don't know where this is coming from, that number.
Well, I think it just helps them build the amount that they can charge until they wind up paying for the conversion. Well, Robin, thank you for taking a look at this and for your thoughts. And Jeffrey, you as well. So it sounds like our next step might be to set up a meeting with Tammy and to sit down and go over some of our concerns about this. The other thing we could add, because it's the document we have suggests that they've already picked the communities that they're going to go to first. They're planning on doing things for the first 2 years. And they've listed Gaithersburg and Tacoma Park and Rockville. And I don't think there were any small communities in that list. The one question I would have is, are there any benefits to Somerset from their doing their smart node pilot? Will there be anything that comes out of that where we would be better off waiting a year? I mean, I would like to have better lighting in town. And so for me, there's a question of, is there a trade-off? If we could push them to include Somerset in the first group, are there some problems we might anticipate from being an experiment and with especially the smart nodes?
I don't think there's any problem with being in the pilot. And with the smart nodes, what I don't know whether they're going to offer options in the pilot to those communities that are participating in the pilot. And sorry, the monthly O&M charge, to get back to that, the 217 O&M charge is of course the old charge, which they're continuing to retain to recover the funds that they're spending. But that is why we want an independent auditor to assess that.
Well, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go on, Marnie.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
'Cause I had a different question. So go on.
I was just going to summarize and say that it sounds like what we should do is I should call Tammy and set up a meeting that would include Jeffrey and Robin and me. I don't think we can have more than 2 council members.
Is Tammy very responsive to you all when you reach out to her?
Usually,
Great, great.
but you know, she doesn't make the policy. She kind of carries the message back.
As long as she responds.
Yeah. And it's somewhat difficult for her right now because of the pending PSC case. And so I think the PEPCO attorneys have control of a lot of the matters now.
Gotcha.
But you know, she'll be very forthright about what she can and can't do.
Great, thank you.
Was there another point you wanted to make?
No.
And President Shaw, before we begin the next item, can I just point out that I need to depart at 7 to join the Glen Echo meeting?
Planning on ending by 7. So if you need to race away, just go do it. But we're not going to be talking much longer.
Okay.
Okay, but thank you, Ron. Okay, so I think we finished then with the PEPCO tariff filing. So now we're going to turn our attention to one of my favorite topics, code revisions.
Franny's too, I'm sure.
Franny is so much better at this. Well, I think you have a number of documents in your binder to look at. The first thing that I think Franny and Ron thought we might want to tackle is the HVAC testing, which is 112-8.
And yeah, not just testing, but whether there should be an administrative process to get air conditioning units approved rather than requiring a hearing before the council.
Right.
So right
That is the
now,
basic.
the mayor can grant a temporary permit, but then the council has to grant the permanent permit for an AC unit. And one of the things that we proposed in the second comprehensive code revision was, instead of having an emergency procedure that's temporary, just change that to an administrative procedure that's permanent.
Yeah.
Oh, and Matt's put it up on the screen there.
This is also something that Matt had raised and Rich Charnovich also had raised as something that should be, I sort of compare it to providing a pest control letter. Like you provide proof that an HVAC unit has passed the noise test or it has not passed the noise test. And once you've done that, it should be an administrative matter in my view. And I think the problem is that because it has become a council voting matter, to me, that it becomes something that then becomes a subjective review where people are, although most of the time we vote to approve the HVAC permit based on that noise, the proof of that noise test, the fact that it is a subjective council vote creates a risk of unfairness to the resident, in my view. So I don't think it should be a council vote.
I don't think it should be either. It's just that there occasionally the mayor may want the advice of council when it's not a straightforward decision. Is the only thought I have there.
Yeah, and I think that would be available if the mayor decided to turn down an application for an HVAC unit, then it would go to the council for a review of the mayor's decision. So you could have an opportunity for the council to review something if there were questions about whether or not the test had been passed.
Is that built into the code as it's now written?
Yeah, you see in paragraph
No
E1,
objection has been raised, right?
right. And yeah, E1, the mayor has the discretion to issue the permit, if it's straightforward. And then that discretion is removed in D if there's an objection raised by a neighbor. So if there's an application that's particularly sticky, the mayor can just send it to the council.
Yeah.
And if a neighbor objects, then it would go to the council as well.
Then that's good.
Right, and something that does not pass the noise test, without proof that the test has been passed, the mayor should not be signing a permit to allow installation. So, I think there are two different levels where we have a review, and one of them is the noise test, and then the next part is the mayor signing the permit. So.
I'm a holdout on this one. I totally understand why we would want it to be administrative, but I go back to the example we had where the air conditioner replacement didn't pass the noise test twice, but we never did anything.
And I remember that too, but I think what should have happened in that case is that the mayor should, I can't remember what actually happened from Jeffrey's point of view, but I think the mayor should have refused to sign the permit if the noise test was not passed.
But then what happens?
Well, then I think then we go into our sort of administrative process, right? Where we have, first a phone call, maybe a letter, and then we have to issue a citation if it's not removed or remediated.
Right, yeah, that's right. Right now, the code provides that when the council grants an application, it's doing so with the condition that the test be performed and that the test be passed. And if the test isn't passed, then it's really too late to revoke the permit because the unit's already been installed. However, you can issue a notice of violation compelling abatement.
Isn't this?
How would somebody abate? I'm
Public?
sorry. I'm
Isn't
sorry,
it-
Jeffrey.
I was gonna say, isn't this taking out the ability for the public to comment?
Why does the
And
public
also,
comment on
and
something?
also, if someone wants to replace their air conditioner, and they're putting it in the same place, they have the right to do that without.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what happens if neighbors don't want it in that? I don't understand what the purpose of changing what the current law is.
Well, we don't regulate the location in the town of Somerset. That's not something the town is reviewing. But I think it's similar, Jeffrey, to if somebody comes to you with a fence permit, right? They are making an application for a fence permit. I'm not sure if we do have enough of a sort of opportunity for public comment, but at least in the fence permit, people have to provide notice to their neighbors, and there is an opportunity at that point. And so we could follow that path and say, if you're going to put in a new HVAC unit, you have to provide notice to your neighbors, which then creates the opportunity for public comment. And if somebody comes in and comments to you, I think your answer would be, it passed the noise test, so I issued the permit. If it does not pass the noise test, you should not be issuing the permit.
I don't think that this has nothing to do with any of the particular people or the current staff. But I think that giving more power to the mayor regarding fences and this stuff is not a good idea.
But the way I understand that, and I tend to agree with you, but I think in this situation, when we are limiting our oversight to the noise concerns, and you're saying that this has to pass the noise test, and if it does, then we're going to go ahead. The objection I have to the current administrative structure is that it puts the power of approving or disapproving an HVAC unit replacement in the hands of the council. And I can remember two instances where the council, basically did not allow people to go through the process of installing the units where they wanted them to be installed, with the risk that they would not pass the noise test. Instead, the council got involved over the location. And I thought that that was the incorrect approach to take, because we were basically saying there's no way it can pass the noise test in that spot, so we're not going to even let you try. And that's not, in my mind, where the council should be going. That a resident should be able to say, I'd like to put the unit in this spot, and if I can remediate it enough so that the noise is not a concern, then the council, in my view, should not be then weighing in and saying, no, you can't put it in that spot. And the problem is that right now, this is providing an opportunity for the council to vote. And you could have a 3-2 vote where the council could say, even if it does pass the noise test, we just don't like that location. And that's not, in fact, what we're regulating. So anyway, I've talked about this many times over the years. I recognize not everybody agrees with me on this, but I think this is a weakness in our structure because it's logically inconsistent. So that's what I think about it. That doesn't mean, you know.
Ron, do you want to weigh in at all?
No. Well, yeah, I mean,
That's fine.
the general thought was, if someone's replacing their old AC unit with a new unit in the same location, there should not be much for the town to review other than the noise.
And I completely disagree with that.
Can someone tell me what happened with the one instant where it didn't pass? Whatever happened with that?
Well, our code enforcement officer twice told the council that it passed, even though the numbers he gave us were outside the county's noise standard, plus or minus its error range. And to my knowledge, the decision was made by the town administration not to follow up.
Great.
And that is an example of why the council should be involved. So they have a level of review.
But you see, that's not fair to other people. There have been other people who've been told that they can't even try to put their air conditioner in a certain location by the council. And I think if we, in fact, are going to regulate location, then we should put that in the code because it's not in there right now. That would be a policy decision.
Ron, in the other towns that you represent, do they have a range of approaches to this issue, or are they doing it totally differently from our current code, or what?
There's a range of approaches. Like, we've had this discussion before. I think generally speaking, permit approvals are done at the staff level because it's typically a yes or no question. Does the application comply with the code? Yes or no? Is the setback for this building met? Yes or no?
Right.
And doesn't require a council hearing on issues of neighbor impact, for example, which are potentially subjective.
But that's not that. But our direction is in the favor of having a process that the council's involved in, not giving the. We don't want to give all the power to the mayor and staff to make all the decisions.
But again, these people would have to provide proof that the noise test was either passed or not passed.
I think that the council should be involved in the process.
How about a suggestion along these lines? What I'm looking for is simpler process as possible for something as straightforward as replacing your old air conditioner with a new air conditioner. Partly because I am an environmentalist and I know new air conditioners are more efficient than old air conditioners. And so therefore you're actually having a gain with that new air conditioner. I don't want therefore a bureaucratic process around it. But how about we do this, which is we leave it with the mayor, but you collect the permits that you've approved and you send them to the council to review so that the council reviews every permit. And if we see a problem or we hear problems from neighbors, then we advise you. We say, wait a sec, this is a problem. And that way we have a simple process and we've got a catch for if things go wrong with that simple process.
Sounds reasonable to me.
I'm not quite understanding. So let's say there's a situation where the air conditioner is directly near the neighbor's bedroom, which is, I think, a case we've had in the past. And the new air conditioner, we all agree, will be more efficient and usually quieter. But depending on the location, it still may not be within the noise limits. But the permit's been issued.
See, again, the permit should not be issued until there's proof that the test has either passed or failed.
So people are putting
That's
in.
not the current practice, Franny. Right now, the practice is grant the permit and then do the test afterwards.
Well, why
Because you
don't,
can't do the test until the machine is installed.
so why don't we talk about granting conditional permits? And then if the test fails, then we have a hook into people where we can issue them a citation unless they remediate it.
Well, that's there now. That's in the code now. So the
Why can't
permit
that
is,
be done by the mayor? I guess that's my question. Why would the council be involved in that?
so I mean, there are some towns, including Somerset, Chevy Chase View, council approves permits. And then there's, hybrid approaches, like in Martin's Additions, I think, Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think their process is the chair and the manager can approve permits, but when an application is filed, a copy is sent to the council. And if any council member raises a concern, then it goes to a hearing before the council.
Yeah, essentially what Robin just suggested, I mean, that goes for any building permit where it's it's reviewed internally and then sent to the council. And if there's no objection within, 10 days or whatever it is, then.
And I guess to the mayor's point.
Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry for interrupting. To the mayor's point, different towns are set up differently. Granting a permit is a quasi-legislative function, and some towns are set up where there's a clerk treasurer instead of a manager, and the council is the one issuing the permits. And Somerset is one that's set up that way. In addition to that's how Chevy Chase View was set up initially, and I think there's another one that escapes me at the moment.
Well, we're sort of a hybrid, right? Because we have some permits that the mayor is permitted to issue. So we're a little bit of a hybrid here.
I want to have a government where you have as much notice and as much public input as possible in every decision. And that's why we're all involved with the cell tower thing. That's why we were involved with the accessory apartment, where there were attempts to take out public involvement and notice to our legislative body. And so I think the way we have it now, it's working, and I don't think we should change it. But that's up to you.
Let me ask this question. So, two questions. One, how do you remediate an air conditioner that doesn't pass the test? And the second is, so under the proposed change in the language where it says, and no objection has been raised, if an objection has been raised, then how does the permit issue get adjudicated or handled?
So, to the first point, again, real life examples. In the town of Chevy Chase, I think there was a unit that didn't pass the noise test, and so they had to install noise barrier walls around the unit to bring it down to permissible decibel levels.
They-
And that one
they-
was louder than anticipated because of its distance from the house and, the requirement for longer underground lines, which made the unit louder than they originally anticipated.
And so you can remediate air conditioners by putting the fencing around and so on.
Right,
Okay.
exactly, yeah.
And we've done that and
Seen that,
we've
yeah.
required that in Somerset.
Yeah, we've seen that.
Generators, we've done that with generators. So the second question, which is under D,
Yeah, if there's an objection from a resident, then the matter would go on the council's agenda.
It could also, and that would include the council objecting itself, of course, because council members are residents. So
Right.
Here's
but
the
we
thing,
would not know about it. We would not know about it unless we were neighbors.
so I think the risk that you run into, you run into a risk that somebody has said, I've always hated the fact that my neighbor has their air conditioning unit in that one spot, right? And yet, when we all know about how the inside of houses work, your air conditioning unit outside is most likely placed in a location that's connected to your house through a whole lot of expensive ductwork and everything. So if you're replacing your air conditioner unit outside, you're probably not intending to do a whole house revision on your ductwork. So the location being in the same place is important to people when they're making this economic decision, right? And you don't want to put something into motion where you create a sense on the part of the neighbors or even the council members that it would be easy just to move it to a different spot, maybe one that the neighbor prefers or maybe one that the council prefers. So I guess to me, it is important that this should be looked at, more objectively and just based on whether or not something passes a noise test. And I think if it doesn't, we have the tools to hook into people and say, either remediate it or we're going to cause you to remove it. And, that would be uncomfortable for us, but we could do it. And we did apparently chose not to do it in one instance, but in my view, we also have overreached in the past and told people that they had to move their HVAC units to locations that they did not pick before we had ever gotten to the point where the noise was tested. So, I think we've gone in both directions here, but we have to remember it's not just sort of like a question of landscaping. I mean, these things are connected to houses in ways that make sense. You can't be too arbitrary about this. And there's, to me, the risk that people might become arbitrary if you create this sort of sense that people have that they have an opportunity to object based on something other than noise. So again, to me, it's like the pest control letter. Either it passes or it doesn't. And if it passes, I'm not sure what the role of the council is beyond that. Or of any other neighbors for that matter. Anyway, Marnie asked me if I had any thoughts about things that I thought were sort of unfinished, or the rest of the time that I'm on the council. And I brought this up because this to me has always been something that I thought needed to be cleaned up in terms of a process. But, again, not everybody agrees. And Jeffrey is on the front lines and he says that it's working.
Sure.
And I'm not, but to me, it doesn't make sense that the council would have an approval role in something like this.
Unless there's an objection, right?
Well, I
says-
mean, again, the objection in my mind would have to be based on something rational, like whether or not the noise test had been passed.
But
Well,
Franny,
that isn't how it reads.
I agree with you. I mean, this is just proposed text. I'm not sure that this does it or not, but.
and Franny, to your point, that when people put these in, it's very expensive to move them. Don't you feel that they would rather know, the couple of times where we've turned it down because we were afraid it would be too noisy? Don't you think they'd rather know beforehand rather than after the?
I mean, in my view, that was overreach because they'd never had the opportunity to try it out, test it out, and throw money at it to fix it.
But what if throwing money at it with fences and things did not fix the noise
Then
and they had
then
to
that would
actively
be-
move it? Do you
Right,
think-
that would be the risk that they took. And I would think that, an architect or an engineer, would be open to a lawsuit in that case.
I'm just trying to think of what would be better for the.
But I'm not sure
resident.
that the 5 of us on the council have any special professional expertise as to whether or not something's in a good location.
All right, I understand. I understand.
And in that one of the ones that I remember we did, it was based on Larry Plummer saying, he didn't think it was going to work. And I thought, maybe he's right, but unless they try it, we won't know. And instead what happened was we said they couldn't even try it. So look, I think most of the time, look, there are 2 different situations. Either you're building a new property and the question about where you put your unit, can be debated. But for most people in town, they're just trying to upgrade their equipment and in fact, probably will end up making it quieter. So I would think most of the time people would end up passing the noise tests. And in fact, if we only can think of one situation where somebody failed the noise test, I think we're doing pretty well.
Does anybody have another point they'd like to make on this? Do you think, looking
Sorry,
at the,
this is Steve. I just, to the extent possible, I would like to see this simplified and just refer to like the rating on the air conditioning units. And I don't know if maybe because of our lot sizes, we should use, and we recognize that houses are closer to each other than maybe the county as a whole, we might want to use lower ratings. That would be allowable, but I just don't think the council, I would hope we have more important things to deal with. And I worry about being somewhat arbitrary like Franny is talking about. Just a few thoughts.
anybody else? Well, the question sort of in front of us is we have some proposed language dealing with making the process more of an administrative process unless an objection is raised by a neighbor. And whether or not we think we'd like to try going with this language.
Yeah, I would amend that so that we, at the same time, have a procedure in place where the permit application is circulated to council members who can object as described in the code.
But what would we be objecting on, just hypothetically, Robin? I mean, before something was installed, we wouldn't have data about whether or not the noise test was passed.
The only thing, well, I mean, we can look up the air conditioning unit and find out what the noise level is off it. That's what we can do. That's about it.
That's not even something we do right now.
And I don't know that that really simplifies the process as Steve and Franny have,
Well, it does simplify it if we don't object, and we're not likely to object most of the time.
But so here's, I guess, my question, and I'm just I haven't looked at this language for a while, and I appreciate the sort of and no objection has been raised drafted language, but to me that again just sort of opens up a possibility for people to come in with objections that might not be related to noise. And I would argue that making things simpler would be saying, does this create too much noise or not? And, other objections that people might have might be very problematic for the mayor or for the council to sort through. So, I'm not sure it helps the issue if we just sort of have an opportunity for an objection, really,
How about a no objection to the noise level has been raised?
But again, that would, I guess, if, let's just play it out. So if an objection to the noise level were raised by a resident or a neighbor, then what we would then say to the resident, you need to bring out the testing company again and have the test run for a second time. And if it passes a second time, then the permit is closed out and the unit stays where it is.
Well, I think what it means is it goes to the council if an objection has been raised, and we would then at that time decide what to do.
So
Wasn't
if,
this objection before the unit is put in? This is, they've shown the plans to the neighbors.
Yeah,
Unit hasn't been
that's part
installed.
of my hesitation with it. You know, if you bring in, you know, to me, that runs the risk that you, like I said, got somebody who's just never liked the fact that their neighbor's unit is where it is, right? And they
Yeah.
might see that as an opportunity to say, hey, I object to this location.
Well, that's where adding to the noise level steers you, because then you can say that's not objecting to the noise level, that's objecting to the location.
So, but basically what they would be objecting to is they'd be objecting to the risk of the noise level being violated. So that just puts us back to the beginning, which is where everybody is, which is there's always a risk that the noise test won't be passed.
Yeah, having listened to this discussion, I've always not wanted to change it, but having heard Steve's comments and Franny's comments, I'm willing to really simplify this without Robin's additions and just go with it and give it a roll.
Mhm.
I'm okay with that. It's just that other people were.
Yeah, no, that was
Oh, I
me.
hear you.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I know. I'm just wondering, I mean, I'm just wondering if, you know, in my sort of intention of trying to have this be focused on whether or not the noise levels have been violated, I would be hesitant to put in language where it's general enough to say, and no objection has been raised. So, I mean, maybe we can ask Ron for some new drafting ideas, but that would be my comment.
Yeah, other possible objections could be, you know, although the town doesn't impose setbacks, the county does. The county allows them to be replaced in the same spot, but a neighbor might be able to argue, well, this isn't the exact same spot. They're moving it a foot closer to me, and under the county code, the air conditioning unit can only project 5 feet into a front or rear setback and can't project at all into a side setback. So, you know, there might be some issue at the county level that a resident would hope to
So
assert at the town level.
could we put into our, I mean, I think have a general assumption that people are complying with county rules, but we could be more specific about it here. Anyway, I don't want to take up, I mean, I'm happy to look at this with Ron if people are thinking that we would want to look for a drafting idea, but I don't know whether I think right now that this covers what we're talking about for tonight. And I don't know what the timetable would be for it, but if people are interested in looking at a way of doing it differently, I could try to work on it with Ron.
Well, I think one of the things, I don't know if there's a way to introduce it in the very beginning, but that we're really looking at this from a noise perspective.
Yeah, we almost do a better job of it on the application itself, I think.
Because we don't really say anything about it till we get down to the very bottom. And we're really trying to alert people that on air conditioners, our authority is around noise.
Well, you know, I'll tell you, for lack of a better term, you know, that the phrase "and no objection has been raised" is sort of a baby step, because right now folks are able to comment on permit applications, including air conditioning unit applications, because there is that, you know, the general language in the code that says with respect to all permit applications, we're considering the enjoyment of the neighbors.
You're right.
Yeah, so, you know, someone could say, even though it meets the noise levels, it's impacting my enjoyment because I don't know. You know, the concrete pad is leading to runoff on my lot or what have you.
Well, I think you're right, and that's something we have talked about before, but I think it's not going to be it's going to be a rare situation, I think. And these things, you know, in some years we have what, 8 or 10 of these per year, you know, maybe more. And I think, you know, I'm sort of with Robin that, you know, I know our house, you know, we really need a quieter air conditioning unit, but there's, you know, no way I would want to be told you have to move it even 3 feet, right? And I don't think any of us would. I mean, so, you know, we do want to encourage people to upgrade their equipment for the environment, but also for the noise pollution. I mean, I know that ours is too loud. So I just think it would be worth it to try to figure out a way to make it less subjective, in my view, I guess only.
Offered to work a little bit more with Ron on the language here. It sounds like we're kind of getting close to an agreement of how we might change this.
Okay.
So maybe what we could do, if the two of you could work on this a little bit for next time, maybe we could you could come up with something that we could all just say, that seems fine. And also I should just add, I think on these issues that are a little more contentious, I don't think we need to have total agreement to put this on the council agenda. So, but it seems like we would be able to get close on this one.
I guess I would also want to just ask before I went too far if Matt would, you know, at some point, if Matt could just let us or let me, or I don't know, let me know what he thinks would work from the administration perspective.
Sure.
Okay. Rather than start something new, and because I know Ron needs to leave in 10 minutes for sure, what I'd prefer to do is actually just tackle the timing for our next work session. And let me just mention 2 of the items that have come up that for our next work session, besides working on the code, are a proposal to open the pool on May 1st. Rather than waiting, and the mayor would like us to talk about that at the next work session.
Marnie, on May 1, did you say?
May 1,
Oh, wow. That's early. Wow.
And then so it's something that we could talk
Is
about.
that in the budget?
Well, that's information that Matt would have to put together for us for that meeting. No, it's currently not in the budget.
Where we put it on the agenda, maybe Matt should see if there are the funds to do that. No?
It's not currently in the budget.
It
would require a budget amendment.
Right, but is there money that could readily be moved, Matt?
I don't have enough information to answer that right now.
I guess maybe before we put it on the agenda, we should know that. If they,
Well,
the
I
reason
think-
it's on the agenda is because the committee made the recommendation, so it has to be discussed.
The committee voted to request this.
I just can't, how much was it to keep it open for another month? Does anyone remember that number?
Well, that's the information that the council president requested.
20,000 or so, I think.
This
How
is
much was it,
similar to a request to what the communications committee made for the website.
It just looks at, the committees are doing such a wonderful job, but we have limited resources. Or
That's one reason why I think the mayor wanted to go on the work session, so we would gather the information and be able to.
And then decide whether or not you want to move it forward.
I see. Great, thank you.
The second item for the work session is Jeffrey and Matt are planning on looking at the personnel manual, because if there are going to be changes, they need to happen before the budget season. So the idea is if we look at it, the work session in March, it could go on the April council agenda. So, and then the code. and other things may come up, but I just wanted to give you a little heads up. So we need to pick a date. Generally, we try and do it before the 15th of the month. So if something comes out of the meeting that should go on the council agenda, we can write about it. I don't think there is anything from this month. So how is the week of the 8th? Preferably not as early as the 8th.
Pretty good, I think.
Yeah, I'm okay on it.
Wednesday is not good for me. Wednesday, the 10th.
Is Thursday the 11th good for people? That would give us a little more time between the council meeting and the work session.
Think so, yes.
What
Wednesday,
about you? What about you, Ron? I know you've got meetings. You're okay on the 11th?
I'm looking right now. Is it 7 o'clock?
No, 5 to 7.
Oh, 5 to 7. Yeah, that's available. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, shoot.
I'm sorry, did I hear somebody say no?
1 second. Ron's,
I'm good. Steve here.
Okay.
Ron's still looking.
I should be available.
I mean, you're a key person here for us.
Um,
Okay, so hearing no other bids, we'll try for Thursday, March 11th from 5 to 7 for the next work session.
Okay.
well,
And so
one,
we have,
one important consideration, Barbara, when is that grandbaby due?
Well, right, exactly. But so thank you, Robin, so much for asking. The due date is March 15th, but they're in Denver and we won't be able to go right away because of our vaccine. So well, it's a work in progress, but thank you for asking, Robin. I appreciate it.
Madam President, also, we need a time for the report on the record. Council, remember I announced that we would be having I would be calling a meeting with our new town employee so she could provide information on her findings on the legal requirements of the town records and any suggestions she's going to make that would require funding in the next fiscal year. And so it is hoped that we can have this meeting, which would only be 30 to 45 minutes at the most, on Thursday afternoon, February 25th. And it could be at 5 if that's better for Councilmember Circo. Or we could do it or we could do it at lunchtime. Don't you have a lunch? Don't you usually take a lunch break?
That's when a lot of people schedule meetings because that's when everybody is free. So it just gets scheduled up.
But also this meeting is we're going to record the meeting so that any council member that can attend will have the info. It's mainly info that you'll have so that when we're going over the budget line by line, and also so you get a report on the status of the records and the legal requirements and all this stuff.
I'm looking forward to that. Matt, when is she funded through? I know we set aside, how much did we set aside for her employment as a contractor? And when do we run out of funds for her?
We had said May, but it was, I think because she got off to kind of a slower start, the money is available. I think it's $6,000.
So she can stay with us until when?
Well, it's partially dependent on how many hours. I think I'm hopeful that we're still on the same sort of timeline that we initially envisioned. She's probably going to, for instance, the last pay period, she put in a few more hours than what she was doing
Does it make sense
before.
to try to do it before our March 1st council meeting? Do it from 7 to 7:30?
No, we want to do it on February 25th.
What was the time on the 25th again?
Whatever time works for the majority of you.
Okay.
So it's February 25th, that's the date?
What's going to work for you? Because I think the rest of us might be more flexible.
Well, we could also, if it's going to be recorded, we could also give Steve a pass if he wanted to watch it at his own time, you know. I don't know whether you would want that, Steve, or not, but if it helps with scheduling, you
Yeah, I
know,
think I would watch it if it's recorded.
yeah. I mean,
Or-
maybe
or
we hold it
early in-
during the day, and
Thank
then,
you.
you know, if Steve had questions about it, he could follow up with them at the next council meeting, which would be a week later.
Although I can do it anytime early in the afternoon is better for me, like 1 PM or something like that, but you know, I am flexible.
Okay, let's say 1 PM.
1 PM on February 25th, that's where we are?
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody, for
Bye,
your
Ron.
hard work.
Good night. Did you want me to attend on February 25th?
No, you don't.
No? Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night.
Bye, Ron.
Everybody take care. Thank you.
We're done. Okay.
Thank
All right.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.